But this film always brings us together, and it's always so lovely to share ideas and share the consciousness with one another of what's happening, around the world. So I'm very grateful for this opportunity to share and connect with everyone here. And I'd like to say thank you to the organizers for putting this all together and for inviting us to share our project with you.
Many thanks, Rizal. Abu Bakr Funogo.
Hello, my name is Abu Bakr Sanogo. I teach film studies and affiliated with the Institute of African Studies here at Carleton. I'm very happy to be able to be here, and Blair, the students who are all behind this fantastic project. Regarding you too, the two filmmakers, for having put this together. I had heard about the aspects of Fallism. I learned tremendously more, so I hope we can talk about some of those. I'm pleased to know that one person I know is associated with it. It was Dylan Valley, which is fantastic. And so I'll leave it there.
Thanks, Abu Bakr. Felicity Howard.
Hi, everybody. I'm Felicity Howard. I'm one of two co-chairs for the Anthropology and Sociology Student Association at Carleton. I was really struck by this film when I first saw it, so I'm glad that we have another chance to get together, especially with the producers, to talk about it and unpack different aspects of it. I'll also mention that I'm currently a guest in what is referred to as Brantford, which is the land of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe people. So I'm just a guest here, but I'm really grateful to be on this land and to be able to connect with all of you today. So I'm excited to get into this discussion.
Many thanks, Felicity. Janie Frigranga.
Hi, everyone. I'm Janie. I'm also one of two co-chairs for the Sociology and Anthropology Student Association. And echoing what Felicity said, we were both very struck by the film the first time we were able to watch it in the later part of last year. And I'm just excited to discuss it more after watching it again for another time. I feel like I'm absorbing a lot more information, so I'm looking forward to discussing that.
Thanks, Janie. Emily Fundira.
Thank you. My name is Emily Fundira. My pronouns are she and her. I'm the co-president of IASSA, the Institute of African Studies Student Association. And I first heard about the film through Janie, actually, last semester in our film studies class with Professor Sanogo. So I'm very excited to discuss about this. Thank you.
Emily. Jean Ishimwe.
Hello, my name is Jean Shimwe. I'm the Vice President of Community Outreach for IASSA. And I heard about the film through, I guess, the organization of this event. And like Felicity, like Janie, and like Emily, I was very struck by the themes that the film brought up and the organizing of the student activists in South Africa. And in the spirit of the, I guess, discussion that we're going to be having, I wanted to take a few moments to discuss a new student group that's operating on Carleton's campus. So the Hassan Diab Student Awareness Group is a student-led campus organization at Carleton that's seeking to raise awareness about the legal extradition case of Dr. Hassan Diab among the student population at both Carleton and the University of Ottawa. So pursuant to this purpose, the group aims to take on and to undertake campus activism to generate greater awareness about the injustice that's being faced by Dr. Diab, and more specifically, about the flaws in Canada's extradition case or extradition laws. So to give just a brief background on the case itself, Dr. Hassan Diab is currently accused by French authorities of his suspected involvement in a bombing that took place in Paris in the 1980s. Dr. Diab was acquitted of these charges in the past. However, he's still being accused of the charges by the French authorities. And since November 2008, Dr. Diab has suffered over 4.5 months of detention in Canada. And he's currently fighting against his forced removal from Canada via extradition to France to face trial based on these charges. And again, I'd like to emphasize that Dr. Diab was cleared of these charges. He was acquitted in the past. So the student-led group is looking to organize and generate awareness about this case, and again, about the flaws in Canada's extradition laws. So if you're interested in learning more about the case and learning more about the student group, I'll link some information in the chat. But I wanted to bring some awareness on that before we started our discussion. So thank you again.
Many thanks, Jean. I'm going to note we potentially have another participant, Byron, who may be joining us. So if he comes in, I'll pin him to the screen as well. I want to let the audience know we'll have the conversation amongst the panelists for about 45 minutes or so, and then we'll open up to wider questions and discussion from panelists. As you see, we're recording it. Apologies for starting the recording late. If you're in the audience and you don't want to be in the recording, feel free to send your questions in the chat and just make a note to me. Please don't mention my name, and we'll just read your question without mentioning your name. And I guess the final point I was going to say before we start the conversation is that if for whatever reason you have yet to see this documentary, I think it's still going to be available on the link for a week or so afterwards. So please feel free to watch it through the link for our event. So I'm going to start off the conversation. I'm going to turn to my wonderful colleague Abu Bakr, and he'll let him start the conversation going.
Thank you very much. Again, thanks to the two filmmakers for making this film. As I said, I was in South Africa, I think in 2016, 17, so around the time of the event, and had a chance to discuss with some of my colleagues at WITS. We were trying to start a project around the archive in Africa. In many ways, your film could certainly have a place in that project. And so it was the first time that I really see extensive images, moving images about the set of protests that took place over a number of years there. And so it was very attractive for me in many ways. And so I'd like to start with the beginning, with the cuisine, so to speak, of putting this film together. One, why did you decide to make this film? Where were you when the movement was taking place? And why did you choose to have also a certain emphasis on artists in some ways? I'll just start with you 3 questions.
Okay, so the idea for the project started in 2015 in Norway, when me and the director, who's not here, Asle, discovered online this movement, and we discovered it a bit late, so it was already all these different issues and debates coming up, and none of them were taking place in Norway. We really felt that this is something big happening here, and the more we read about it, the more kind of the issues it took up were like so much reflected also in our country and in, you know, everywhere. So we were puzzled by that. And we thought these debates need to happen here as well. And it's important to say that 5 years ago, you know, there was so few of these debates in much of the world, you know. So, and none of it was happening in a lot of European countries, at least on a very, very small scale. So we traveled to South Africa, already becoming increasingly aware, like how problematic that was in itself. So our first travel to South Africa was to try to reach out to activists and filmmakers to see if it was even possible or interest to try to make a collaborative project of this movement from the perspective of telling a story together, but also introducing these issues to places where these debates weren't happening. And that's how we got connected to Vishal, who we met through a common acquaintance. Vishal, I don't even remember exactly
I
how.
do.
Yes.
So yeah.
It was kind of like, I just remember meeting you, but it's, yeah, and having really interesting conversations. So then we can take it over to you and your starting.
Okay. So when I met the film crew, they were sort of, just completely they deflated, what is the word? They were deflated, trying to connect with people. There was something that happens with Black issues, in a white colonial place is this fatigue, having to explain to white people what's happening, and no, you can't take this, you can't, right, this is our issue, so that was happening at the time. And so a lot of people were fatigued. A lot of activists, a lot of students were fatigued, and there were lots of lenses, white lenses all over the place, and people were just kind of saying no, no. And so the film crew were at that point just, I think deflated, because they were thinking, hey, they're not going to be able to get anything here because no one wants to talk to them, no one wants to let them in. And at the time, so I remember the contact that I was doing a play in a prison. In one of our big prisons here in Cape Town, and one of our partners was Norwegian. So I don't know how, but she, somehow connected Ingvild with me, because I had a little bit more stamina at the time for other things. And so I remember we met at the beach for breakfast, and I laid it down straight. I said, look, this is the thing. If you want to capture this, if you want to be part of this, your intention is pure. You want to create debates about this, on the other side of the world. You want to bring this into other ports. You want to spread the human rights aspect, so these are good intentions. However, how you execute that, how you go into the space right now that is completely wounded and triggered, is a completely different thing. So we're gonna have to, create your what we would call adab, which is like your honor. You'd have to have a certain honor to go through that, right? A certain humility, a certain understanding of the space. And so we became like, almost overnight, we became partners in that. And we sat down and we made a list of artists and people that, we wanted to talk to. And what our grander vision was. We sat down with the whole thing and went through everything together. And that's really where that partnership was born. When everyone's kind of tired and you're tired of saying the same thing and talking about the same thing, and now here comes another team and they also want to be part of your struggle. Again, to repeat, it's a question of stamina, creative stamina at the time. And I said, okay, look, we got to do something completely different. And luckily for me, the Norwegian team had a lot of unique ideas. The aspect of bringing the art, and for me as a creative, that was very stimulating at the time that I'm here. So they really had a unique angle, but didn't have the connections. So I became the connector, and the rest is history.
Excellent. This is great, because I think, the term that you use is very inspiring to me, the idea of ADA. If you can tell us a little bit more about it, because obviously, the question of, in general documentary practice, the question of how does one insert oneself in a space, and this one in particular, as you so beautifully put it, was a wounded space, a space where suspicion obviously existed, and for excellent reasons in many ways, one could say. Could you say a little more about this, if you will, and the role it ended up playing?
Yeah. So I was connected with a few of the people on board in a very particular way. We had worked together. Okay, so now you guys are frozen. Are you with me? Can you guys hear me still?
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Okay, I'm just you guys are all frozen, but I trust that you're there. Okay, I'm going to continue. This is our new world. Okay. So basically, I was connected with a few of the artists personally. We had worked together before, and there was already that respect and rapport between us, right? So besides that already existing connection, with the artists that Ingvil and the team approached on their own, there was that need for someone local, someone who had the understanding, someone who could bridge the gap, who could, diplomatically persuade, whoever our guest was, whoever we wanted to speak to, and say, look, I'm vouching for these people, right? So I'm vouching for them. I'm saying that the intentions are in the right place. I'm aware of the woundedness. I'm aware of the triggers in the space right now. However, I'm saying this is safe, right? So this is safe. So I became sort of the, the point of contact when it came to credibility around what we were going to do, how we were going to do it. And so we solidified that exchange by that credibility. Another thing that was really important and that we explained to all the artists is that myself and Ingvil, we were sort of the lions at the time, attacking this hunt. Myself and Ingvil, we fought every day, we argued every day. So it wasn't like they could also pick up on that energy, that this wasn't a situation where, the money was zero. So it wasn't even like we're getting paid, it wasn't, there was literally nothing on the table besides the fact that we want to make a beautiful piece of art and we want to take it into the world because this needs to be shared, right? So although the nature was extractive, we are again pushing that intention, reminding everyone about our intention, being transparent about the fact that myself and Ingvil, as the leaders of the project, we are constantly checking ourselves, checking one another. When you have that kind of energy in that, like I said, that triggered space, people are a lot more open and people are a lot more vulnerable with you. They understand that this is not going to be the slick kind of easy thing. Usually with film, we want everything to be slick and efficient and working well and nothing much, but none of that was how we were doing things. We would first, speak, wanting to connect with people, explain to them where we were at personally. We made lots of errors, film errors in the beginning, there were lots of technical issues. So none of it was smooth. And we were just honest, I think, all the way, vulnerable about where we were at, having difficult conversations with each other and not exactly shielding the person that we're speaking to from that. So they could also see that this was a process unfolding. Whereas before we would kind of like, pretend to be the best friends and then at home we would fight. On a typical film shoot. We had none of that. So I think people were also like, okay, these guys are also trying to figure things out, just like we're trying to figure things out. So we're on the same level. And I think us being vulnerable in that way when it came to producing for the first time together, that was a major shift for the people that we were dealing with.
Excellent, thank you. So one last question, I open it to the students. So what were the obstacles? Because there clearly must have been obstacles. And so what were some of the obstacles that you may have encountered, either or both with the subject you chose, so the interviewees you chose, and the institutions where you were filmed, let's say the campus of UCT, for example, or the campus of Leeds and other places?
So I think especially I think especially the two of us coming from Norway, we never anticipated, all these different issues that would arise and that would like kind of where we would be confronted with kind of all these problematic issues that we wanted to talk about in the film also became part of the filmmaking process itself. So continuously, we would have these discussions like, okay, well, we didn't have much money, but we had a budget. So how are we going to prioritize that? You know, how are we going to make decisions over that? Maybe there was some creative differences, or and then so continuously we had these discussions where we could never kind of move on before we had kind of addressed it, you know. And I think, and that was what Rizal and the filmmakers and also the activists, they would always hold us to account for that, you know. So how from our side we wanted to be open, we wanted to do it, but we did mistakes all the time. But then we had created a space where we could then discuss it and address it and move on. And that the most important thing finishing the film would be that everyone kind of felt that, you know, this is a story that we can, that feels like our story, and that we are friends in the end, you know. Yeah. So that was kind of the process itself became extremely important throughout, and was also very difficult, but also it's kind of the most challenging and most I'm looking for the right word of my life, you know, of really digging so deep to try to see the world and differently, you know, and that was through this process that these activists were like had already, you know, done so much work with. Yeah.
Excellent. I don't know if you want to have something, Rizal. If not, I will open to the students.
Yeah, just to make my last comment on what Ingvild said, you know, the most challenging and most rewarding process at the same time, constantly, I think with the UCT space especially, the physical space of the campus was very tense. So the physical space, you know, the actual stairs being there, the physical campus was really intense. I remember filming there that one day, and just, I mean, everything that could go wrong went wrong, like, you know, in terms of technical and things, and walking up and down that step and getting the guy to walk across and do it 7 times. And, you know, I remember viscerally feeling that, sure, you know, we need to shoot off campus as much as possible, because of that, you know, and because we focus so much on what artists were feeling and thinking about the movement. So that objectivity, and I always say, you know, that after we are all gone from this planet, you know, the only thing that's left is art, right? To kind of interpret what we were feeling, what we were thinking at the time. And our expressions are so important. So the mindsets of the artists looking at this protest, who were part of this protest, and what they were creating, so valuable. And so that was the biggest relief for us, was we were zooming out slightly, so we were right in the middle of that, and then we could zoom out and look at what people were creating. And I think that also gave us a lot of reprieve from the constant conflict that we were engaging with on a daily basis with one another. You know, like Ingvild would challenge me and say, you know, this is what we need to do, and I'm like, you know, because you're white now, that's why you're thinking like that, you know what I mean? Like that. You can't say things like that. And then she'd be like, okay, so what should I say? And it's like, okay, well, try it from this thing. And then, you know, then there's that kind of tension, and then it has to dissipate before we can be creative together. And, you know, she would challenge me constantly with me being a little bit more organized and structured, you know, because I was all over the place. And so we really did that value exchange every day, you know, from the north, you know, the northern spirit and the southern spirit coming together and trying to create something in the middle at a time when everything is telling us not to be friends. It was extremely challenging. So yeah, the most challenging and rewarding experience, definitely, at the same time.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'd like to open to the students who obviously also watch the films and who would have their own take on it and would engage with you and with each other. I think we all will try to see how we could create a conversation around this, in fact, big question, which is, we can say, in fact, which even extend beyond South Africa, beyond Canada. Which in some way takes us toward the question of what do we think might be some of the roles and even potentially responsibilities of students that in transforming the world, society, the world around them, and obviously in the particular case of topic that you chose the immediate environment, which is the academic space, the university space at the very least. And so, I'll open up to you. So Felicity, Jaren, Jean, Emily, and others, if you want to jump in.
Well, I definitely, I'll jump in if my peers don't have any, they don't want to go first. But I mean, I have a couple questions, a couple relating more specifically to the issues of the film, but with where we're at right now, I think I'll ask my questions that I guess pertain to the structure of filming that the two of you might be able to speak to. One of my first questions, I guess, would be, I'm just really curious about like what your relationship with the activists that are present in the film, like if they've been maintained, like what do those relationships look like now? Because I know like that's something that often happens in like documentary filmmaking is, there's this tendency to like, you go in and then you film and then that's kind of like the end of the relationship. But then I know that the two of you were discussing how you were trying to establish this relationship of trust and understanding, and like there was a lot of openness, and I really appreciate like hearing that. So yeah, I'm curious to know what the relationship looks like now.
Do you want to go? Oh, I can go first. Yeah. So like I said, I've connections with some of the artists before even the film, so that's exactly where it is today. But I will admit that there are a few people from the film that I haven't spoken to since filming process. We did a follow-up when we tried to when we had our first screening, I think, in World, right? When we were like done with the final cut or something, and then Ingvild, she's probably the most inclusive person I've ever met. Like she's like, we have to show everyone. And I was like, do we need to do that now? Like, and she's like, yes, no, we have to show the film to every single person first before we go to our. And I was like, okay, let's do it. And we tried to get hold of everybody, post this hectic, political period is also hectic, so people, they've changed their numbers, they've moved cities, they changed their course, they changed, this protest really changed everything, even the physical space of the university. So but we managed to get everyone together. We had that online little party, and so that was the last time I saw a few individuals. But like I said, the ones that are my, let's say, we creative friends in the industry, I still have connections with them. So for me, I'd say 50-50 on the personal side.
I also have to say that the pandemic really, really messed up a lot for what was our intentions, when we were going to put the film out in the world, because we were planning to travel, like in South Africa, we were planning to have screenings and debates at the universities with the activists. Me and Vishal, the plan was that we will always be Vishal and ideally also an artist or an activist present in these debates as the film was premiering in Paris, Toronto, London, etc. And all these premieres turned into digital premieres 2 weeks before. It was a mess, So, yeah. And that kind of took, unfortunately, that also kind of lowered our spirit for a while. It was, and I guess it would have been so much more interaction. if it hadn't been for the pandemic and how that affected all of us. Yes, because it was really the plan to have these debates, that the film would always be shown in a setting where one or two or three could contribute to the discussions. Anzio actually came to Norway for a debate. Vishal was also supposed to be here, but she got stuck in the US. And Anzio, he participated also. He wrote his thesis on this project, on the film project, and being part of this film project. And he also engaged a lot with the decolonization debates with the indigenous people in Norway, you know, because that is, Norway also have an indigenous population, the Sami. So that was also an exchange happening of different type of decolonial project, academically and artistically. So yes, so that's, I hope that answers a bit what you asked.
No, it definitely does. And I'm glad to know like how thorough both of you were like in the process of reaching out, because it is something that obviously you want to show the people who are involved first, so that they are okay with how they've been represented, and that the movements themselves have been represented accurately. So yeah, no, I really appreciate that answer. And I think Jean has a question for the two of you next, so I'll turn it over to Jean. Oh, unless, oh, sorry, I saw Emily has her hand up.
Yeah, just quickly, I wanted to follow up on what you just said, and I think kind of in the same breath of what Felicity was saying in terms of accessibility, and you talked about screening this film in university, and we see, and I find that you brilliantly depict the exclusive nature of these movements, and I think it's also been commented on in the documentary, of having people not understand certain terms and terminologies, and feeling like, oh, these are, and I know Jean is also going to talk about it, like touch on it. So I don't want to go into too many details about the nature of these movements, but rather talk about perhaps, were you planning at any point to screen the documentary in non-academic spaces and show this documentary to people outside of universities?
So we were talking about like trying to get it to local TV, and also Anzio was working much more with more local community organizations that were not part of the university, the academic community. And that was also, so when we were discussing this roadshow, and it was also about also bringing it into art spaces, but also more importantly, is perhaps also the broader community, which can also feel alienated to this kind of intellectual language. And that was also something the movement addressed, the activists themselves, that maybe that's also where they failed a little bit to use the language and draw in those people who are not so familiar with this terminology that was used. But again, it maybe at some point if we will be able to pick up again when it's easier to move, and yes, but it's been 2 years where it's been difficult to plan outside of these online settings. Yeah.
I remember that the news here in South Africa picked up the film and was talking about it, and I remember Ingvil calling me and being like, okay, cool, so PR, publicity, all of that. You're going to need to talk on the TV and tell people about the film. And I was like, okay, cool. So South Africa, this is my country. I can do this. So I go into the news and I talk about the film and the issues about the film. And I get a phone call from a family member, like just as I drop, because they've seen me on the news now. Now they call me, they're like, I saw you in the news, my child, well done. And I'm like, oh, thanks, auntie. And then she's like, in her, like in our language now, she says, and we translating to English now. She's like, you look so nice, but I didn't understand anything you said. But I'm so proud of you. You look so nice on TV. And I thought, okay, so this is where we're at with our issues, So this is definitely, a millennial Gen Z debate. A lot, the majority, I think, of our older family members and elders, the capacity for the conversation around gender, around decolonization, around art, expression, changing, our physical spaces to make ourselves feel held. These are issues that our elders are not, the majority of our elders, let me not be, let me not say that blankly, but I'm talking now certainly in South Africa, majority of our elders are not ready or equipped for that discussion. So that was, the PR campaign really showed me that, where, I should have taken maybe one issue and spoken about one issue, and talk about the language of the issue and how we go about that issue. But the film itself is so layered, and there's so much to extract from it. So that was a big learning curve, I think, for me, like right off the bat in the beginning, that it's a lot to unpack, for people that are not academic, for people that are not, thinking about how to change the infrastructure of our socializing, of how we connect with one another. So yeah, so we had grand ideas about the roadshow, and we were all excited. Myself and Ivo, we really had plans, and then we were humbled by the collective around Corona and the lockdowns. And but look at us now, hasn't stopped us. We're in Canada right now spiritually, so we're still doing the things. It's just the format looks completely different. But hopefully, inshallah, Emily, to answer your question, there will be something when the right time, when it's the right time.
So I wanted to ask a question, still staying within the theme of the sort of intentions of the film itself. I wanted to ask, because I was curious while I was watching the documentary, I was curious about the intention and the reasoning behind the focus on art, on visual art in particular, sort of this connective link and tissue that was present throughout the movie or throughout the film. And I wanted to know what both of your opinions were on what art offered as a way to analyze and communicate the interests of the different Fallis movements, and also what I guess it communicated to or what it allowed and facilitated for the activists themselves, because quite a few of the activists were artists. So I was interested in why you guys chose to focus and key in on visual art throughout the movement. And before you guys answer your question, I also do want to, I guess for the sake of order, Jaren wants to ask a question after me. So Jaren, I'll open the floor for you after the producers answer my question. So yeah, what were you guys, what was the intention? What was the thinking, the thought process behind the focus on visual art?
Do you want to start, Giselle?
Yeah, you can go first. Yeah.
So I think it kind of, with the Fallis movement, it kind of struck you immediately. There was so much art in the movement, and I think also that was kind of also what kind of hit, as a human being from a very across the globe who didn't know these issues. That kind of was also one of the first things that spoke to us before we we read up on what does Fallism mean, what does this mean, before, it kind of hits you immediately, the arts, and it's something that resonates, and it's something that also holds kind of ambiguity, it's a bit open-ended, so it paints up these ideas and visions of dreams and hopes and feelings. So that's also why we kind of started there, of kind of like we want to get into this kind of that rose both like feelings and some questions and some connection and curiosity, to also balance off that, especially those parts that are more intellectual and political and activist. So you would have this like that it can, it's a bit more, I don't know. So this is, English is my second language, obviously. So I sometimes struggle with the words. Yeah, but to kind of take you into a space of like dreaming and imagining before you really know what the political debates in this particular context are, yeah.
Yeah, so the art, I think what Ingvild's trying to say is that the space, Ingvild, just correct me if I'm not getting it, the space was so loaded and so intense that when the entry point through art gave everyone this middle ground, gave everyone this place to stand together and to reflect, right, on what we were feeling and what our goals were, where we wanted this to go, what the pain was in the space, how do we make that pain tangible so we can move it aside or we can go deeper into it. But the space itself was so charged that, going through that art lens or going through the door of art, it put everyone on this plane where we could communicate with one another, because art is something that whether you're from Norway or whether you're from South Africa, whether you're from South America, Australia, wherever you are in the world, when you have a conversation about art, all of a sudden people can find their voice and we can find that commonality, so we all want to bring meaning to the world. We all want to express ourselves no matter where we're from. And so art puts us in this plane where we can transcend the very human aspect that grounds us in that struggle. It kind of just transcends us just enough to be able to reflect without bringing that hurt or without bringing too much of that emotion, into the space. And we were constantly in that space in this process. We were constantly emotional. We were constantly, in the fight, and on the forefront of the fight. So that space of creativity, the space of ancestry, the space of being channels for different powers that move us to express ourselves on this dimension, that really gave us the relief and I think the power to bring it all together. There were times when, we would follow the artists on their rounds, doing what they're doing, going into their homes, very intimate spaces where they were creating, and we could feel that, we could feel how different it was being in that space as opposed to the university space, the intellectual space where people were just, talking and thinking, and obviously protesting, and there were lots of words and there were lots of, kind of harsh kind of battering of different ideas, different headspaces. And then you go into this artist's home and they are creating the most incredible expression of what we just witnessed in that other space, right? So it's just this juxtaposition, but at the same time, it's not juxtaposition, it's exactly the same thing, just through a different door. So I don't know if I answered your question there, Jean. Jean,
yeah, you did. Thank you.
Jean, okay.
May I ask my question? Awesome. I'm super happy to join this event. It's been a while since I've joined an AFRI event. I just graduated recently, a couple of months ago. And so the question that I wanted to ask is, I felt that these protests and the others that have been happening around the world recently, they were with specifically youth, like not necessarily young children, but students. And so I see it as like we're entering into adulthood, like full of energy more than someone who's older in their years. And so the thing that confused me when I was learning from the documentary, from the film, is that a lot of the challenges being faced was sort of like the inflexibility, the unwillingness to change of like the older generation, if I got that right, to the demands being met of the Fallis movements. And so the reason that confused me is because I thought that there must have been a time when the older generations fought for a similar cause, when they were similarly young and had similar energy, you know? And so I thought, if that's true, then why were they obstacles when I feel they could have the ability to empathize with young people, specifically like, because the older generations were young once too, but the younger generation has not been old yet. So
Yes.
I'm curious what you think about that.
So it's so beautiful that you picked up on that. So in South Africa, especially if I look at my parents, right, they also had a fees must fall, but their one was around they boycotted the universities during apartheid for periods. So my parents actually graduated, like they took a year and a half longer to graduate when they were at university because of the boycott. Right, so similar thing as fees must fall, and they were boycotting, of course, the apartheid government at the time. So my father would tell us, stories of going to, places they would have like a bunch of nails in their pockets with little hammers, and they would make all the kind of white university professors' cars tires flat as they would enter the university. And so when they drove out, all the tires were flat, of the professors' cars. Anyway, so they had their own protesting in those years. But remember, that was race and access. So, and their bodies were heavily on the line. I mean, that, at that time, if they caught you, they shoot you, that's it. That there was, at the fees must fall, the Fallism time, we're a lot more, of course, there's violence. Let me not underplay the violence. There was violence, right? So I'm not saying the violence was less this time. No. What I'm saying is the system around the violence is completely different. So, we're working with apartheid here. This was completely militant, right? So you could disappear in a van and not be found again, type thing. Whereas now we lock up the students. We know exactly they're going to that prison. They're going, it's everything. We're not under that regime anymore. So I think what happened again, this word fatigue. So the older generation, the consciousness is around like, we've been through war and we're at the point now where we need to rest, and the capacity for issues like gender equality, the talk around decolonization, what that's going to mean for curriculum, what that's going to mean for the physical space of the university. Just talking about the statue alone is extremely triggering for that generation, right? So being through a war, what do we call it? A genocide, ultimately, which is what apartheid was, a genocide and a war. And now you're telling us there's more things, right? So, they, in their mind, it's like, we needed to kill this enemy. We need to open the gate. We opened the gate. The enemy is now at bay, not at all economically, but, in the minds of, we are now free. Our kids are now at the university. So our kids of color are now taking up space at the university. For them, it's like, that's a win. Okay. So now bringing the issues of internal issues, like how I express myself. Am I safe physically? Am I being able to find my voice as someone who identifies as female versus someone who identifies as male in the same classroom? Who's going to lead? These issues for them were like petty. So it was deemed as petty from a lot of the elders, because you didn't even see the genocide. What are you talking about? So there was that undermining constantly from the elders in terms of, you at the university, make it work, make it happen. You got the opportunity, don't be lazy, run with it. So there was even from like I say, from the middle class and lower middle class, people of color, the old generation, it was very much like kind of shameful, to ask for handouts, to ask for free things when we fought so hard to get you into that space. Now you want the handout, now you want things to be free. So that chat and that undermining from the people that are supposed to be supporting you or helping or assisting you with that plight was also very created a lot of wounding in the movement itself. Because remember, if you're not fighting, you're fighting against your system, the system of the university, you're fighting against your professors. Now also at home, your parents don't understand you. Immediately isolated, immediately your back's against the wall. So it was very difficult for the young people in the movement at the time.
That is so cool. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks, Jen.
I'm thinking a lot about your answer right now, Whistle, but also because I don't want to just turn away from it. And so I'm wondering if anybody has any reflections about this kind of butting of heads between generations, because it's something I think that we see in movements across the globe, especially anti-colonial or anti-capitalist abolitionist movements where past generations have fought for certain access, and then when that access is achieved, it's like, okay, well, now we have a seat at the table, specifically within institutions that have previously excluded Black and brown bodies or people and trans people. And I think with this generation, not that past generations haven't been asking for it, but it's we're calling for more beyond that, because we're trying to live and see and imagine what an anti-capitalist, anti-colonial world can really look like and experience that. And so, I don't want to fully turn away from that, because I feel like it's a really important note to continue down. But I see two hands up. I did have another question, but if I don't want to not have you guys comment. So if the two of you want to go ahead.
Great, yeah. Wendy, why don't you make your comment, and then Jared, and we'll continue the conversation. Get back to Felicity for her question.
Yeah, Jared, I think that was a very interesting observation, and I think I can speak as part of the older generation, but also one that was an activist in my youth and had very many friends who were jailed at the time, and that we were focused on overturning apartheid. But I do feel, and I take what Visal was saying, and I agree with most of that, but I think partly the older generation feels that it is time for the youth to speak. It is their space, and it's like maybe there's a lot of older people who sympathize with what the Fallism movement is doing, but we don't feel that we should be entering that space, because this is time for the new youth, the new activists to fight, to move forward. I don't know what you feel, Visal, if that registers with you, if that resonates.
Yeah, I think Wendy, also from an activist lens, I think most definitely. However, I feel that was a very limited corridor of the older generation that were actually present to that change. I was speaking more, the masses in South Africa, the mass kind of population, didn't go to university. If they did go to university, that was, because they were brilliant and someone gave them, a space. But the masses, people of color, watching all of this on the local TV, on the radio, on the news, it was something that they couldn't really connect with or understand, And I think that for the youth, especially the Black youth, when I say Black, I mean, Steve Biko Black, so people that, including all Black. Okay, we're there. Okay, so when the Black youth, they were very isolated and unsupported, You know, they were very, very unsupported. And I think, you know, if there were more elders in the space, look, I know there were activists coming to university every day, cooking for the students, bringing pots of food, those that were taking up space on the campus. There was that care from, again, Wendy, the civil society movements, the NGOs, you know, the academic activist spaces. But majority, you know, when university's all well and good, but you have to go home, right? So you have to go home. And at home is often where we're most triggered, most challenged, where our worst fears and our biggest insecurities are laid out before us, because it's our blood, right? So our blood is there and it's boiling. And I think the lack of support from the home, you know, from our tribes, from our religions, from the things that ground us, you know, in our culture, I think that was a big failure on behalf of our elders in that way. I think there could have been a lot more support, or even just the willingness to understand, even just, you know, things like gender, you know, having that conversation. It's like, where's that conversation, you know, in our country right now? Nowhere. I mean, our statistics in South Africa are shocking when it comes to gender and gender-based violence. So just, you know, looking at it from blanket point of view, I think that we really failed our students in that way.
Yeah, thank you. That's very interesting.
Jaron, yeah.
Yeah, because one part of the documentary that got me this question was, I remember there was a part in the middle of the film where someone mentioned the importance of how the students protesting were the first ones born after the fall of apartheid. And that stuck out to me so much because I majored in international relations. And so I remembered how also the student protests that happened in other parts of the world, like Hong Kong, for example, those students were also the first generation born after Hong Kong was returned to China in 1997. So all like the 1997, 98, 99 babies, they were the ones protesting in the context of being students in university. And so like, I just thought that it's like, if I may, it kind of sounds like the next decolonial step, because when the structure changed, the new society changed, and then there were things that can't be connected specifically from generations, not like politics or something like that, but specifically age is the impact. And so then moving further away from that towards something more equal, more fair, more respectable, then that anger boils up when those changes don't match reality, I feel like.
Yeah. So interesting that you said that, because that is exactly how it felt for me, you know, with Ingville making this film and then kind of having to explain it to my family and my tribe, you know, what we're trying to do. And it's like, you know, you're trying to convince them you're not selling out because you're working with the Norwegian, you know, with the Norwegian team. It's like, no, this is the next step, because, you know, even though we're fighting for decolonization and all of this, the world is a place, it's much smaller as a millennial. The world is much smaller than it was, you know, for my parents and my grandparents who are still in the home, right? So we grew up like that. Grandparents, parents, cousins, we're all in one house, right? So there's no escaping that opinion or that thing. You constantly have to explain, you constantly have to try and create that middle ground, communicating with your family. And it's like, okay, well, you know, co-productions are reality. Traveling and understanding one another is a reality in my life. Working together with the Northern Hemisphere is a reality in my life. Collaborating is a reality. We have to find ways to meet one another, to find that middle ground, to do that value exchange of what are you most good at? What am I most good at? Let's try and put that together, and through our differences, create a better landscape. I think that time of, you know, kind of coming up against one another and batting heads and walking away, I think that's in the past. I think the diplomacy, Jaron, I think Jaron was the one talking about diplomacy. The diplomacy of the time is actually moving through conflict, as opposed to, you know, retracting and pulling weapons on one another. I think the time is now where the way we treat one another and finding that middle ground is, and pushing through all of that strain and trauma is actually worth it, because we are that generation that is asking for more. We are asking to thrive as opposed to surviving. our reality. And in order to do that, in order to be them in the most fertile ground, or to find ourselves in the most fertile ground, to be able to heal our trauma, our own physical trauma, but then also the trauma we've inherited being in the homes of our parents and grandparents, and still interacting with those generations who have visceral trauma still in their system from their war times. We've inherited that additional burden, because we want to sort of not heal our family, but we want to make sure that those things don't happen again, right? That we make them proud, we do the right thing, we take advantage of our opportunities that they never had. So there's all of that we're carrying. And the time is now for us to find that middle ground. So this film and this whole process was very spiritual for me, because I was challenging myself constantly, and Ingvild constantly was challenging herself as well to try and find that middle ground. Even though you're triggering me, what you're saying is so basic. I can't believe we're having this discussion again. We just spoke about this yesterday. And that patience with me around, that's not how you do a budget. That's not how you do it. Just very simple things that here in South Africa, we hadn't gotten to that point yet, because again, third world country versus a first world country, our systems are not that advanced. The Norwegian systems are way more advanced than us, way more inclusive. Just that simple value exchange of talents and ideas and thoughts and feelings was huge for us in this process. And so I'm just bringing it back to the film, but now is definitely the time for diplomacy, for heartfelt diplomacy, if I can say that, just commenting on what Jaron was saying as well.
I just also want to add something to that, and kind of what was so fascinating, I think, and important with the Fallism movement was that intersectionality was an overarching framework, pillar for the movement. So there was a time of coming together on what brings us together. And then there was a time for also addressing what are our conflicts. So it went in these like waves of realizing what's your positionality in this space, what's your privilege, what you're now, and addressing those things, and being able to be both allies, but also opening up for having conflict and discussions and addressing that. And I also want to say that when we started this project, the Norwegian Film Institute didn't give any support for the film. When it was finished, they gave us some little support for distribution, but we had to go through all these like bureaucratic debates, etc. Now the Norwegian Film Institute has created a completely new framework for diversity, and it's very proactive. So on all projects, you have to write about how is this contributing to different types of diversity, not only so it has in crew, in who brings the creative input, and on what issues. So on all the parts of the creative process, these issues are now being institutionalized to enable more voices in all the areas of filmmaking. So that's a huge change from when we started 5-6 years ago, when they were like, we don't understand this project. What is decolonization? What is intersectionality? And so that is some promise that by bringing those issues, things can also change. And I feel that many of the things we try to address in our like microcosmos of this project is now actually being addressed in the biggest institution, and that's I'm very happy to see those things happening in the border system also, because we've been working hard on that in film festivals, like the inequalities that are inherent in these institutions.
So what I'm hearing, I feel like what both of you are just speaking about just segues perfectly into what I wanted to ask you, because I've been thinking a lot about, I think all of us have been thinking a lot about the contradictions that were like present at times, and how they were worked through, like, and through like what Vasa was saying about the necessity of like diplomacy in these conversations, and then like how different views can confront each other, but then have critical conversations that then lead to kind of like a unified understanding in the end of things. So within the movement itself, that like the various movements that were represented within the film, there was, you know, I think what stood out for me was the exclusion of trans people, like through the existence of heteronormativity, like inherent sexism and patriarchy, like that we often find within movements, and how those contradictions have to be worked through. But then I was thinking earlier about Ingvild, like you mentioned that, you know, there wasn't a lot of funding when the film was first being produced, and how like that's something that was reflected as a struggle that the students were facing was against fees. And then you felt connected in a sense with the lack of funding that the film crew was going in with. So I'm wondering like how contradictions that were present within the movements were also present within the filmmaking process, specifically about, you know, the presence or possibly like lack thereof of trans people like informing the filmmaking process, and how that might have, like whether there was presence or absence, and how that impacted the development of the film to then report on, you know, the, what was it called? The trans capture, for example.
Do you want to start?
Okay, yeah, I can start, you can finish it definitely. So just on the fees, let's just onto the fees, right? So that was hilarious because at the time, everything we were doing, even this play I was doing in the prisons, whatever, there was no money. Okay, no one had money. It was people who had money at that time. I don't know, they had dads and stuff that were paying for them. But let's say the majority, no one had money for any of the projects that they were doing. Everyone was manifesting, I think, how or coping with what was happening in their own way, right? So whether they were making art, or they were writing articles, or they were physically protesting with the students in support, people were finding ways to do what they could to either support or reflect on the process, right? It was a big thing that was happening at the time. And so when Ingvild was like, okay, we need to make this film, and we sat down, we looked at, you know, basically their contribution. So it was in their pocket, right? So pocketed, so what they could, you know, put forward. What we decided on immediately was anyone who was going to come in besides us to actually help us with anything is the priority, right? So we're not asking for favors. We're not asking people to put themselves out there without giving them any kind of offering. If someone's going to drive us somewhere, we're going to make sure they get something. The least is that people get fed. How do we go about this in a way where we're not completely extracting from the process? So that was a priority for us. And I think that's also what bonded myself to Ingvild very quickly, was that she had that value system, right? So her value system, yes, we're completely different, you know, language barrier and all of that, but we had that same value system where we don't just go into the place and expect things to happen for us. We actually need to pay for things if we can, right? So I think that immediately bonded us. And then also, you know, looking at the activists at the time, and how we were going through the same thing. So it was extremely difficult working with the trans community. I'll just, you know, be completely transparent about that. I felt very challenged at the time working with the community. They had just come out of a very traumatized space. And so the opportunity to connect was very difficult, right? So that was always very highly charged, a highly triggered space. It wasn't as easy to get information or to set up times to connect and things like that. One Dili was a godsend to us. They well, now yes, them, they, Wandile, they are, let's say that a lead, they were the lead in getting us into that space. We followed their kind of, lead on when to call, when not to call, what to say, what we could share. But even that interaction was also very difficult. For myself as a queer person, dealing with gender-based violence is usually, where I deal with things on the ground with prisons and stuff like that. It was difficult because it was just timing, it was timing. The main priority was that we didn't want to re-traumatize people. So we're asking people to reflect and take us back into their memories and what they did, and we didn't want to re-traumatize anybody, right? So asking the trans capture group and the trans community to, share this all over again, the sentiment and the intuition was like, this was traumatizing all over again, So that was very challenging because, as the filmmaker, that you're asking them to share. At the same time, that sharing in itself is really difficult, and so we were extremely, there were times when we were like, is this even going to happen? Is this, do we include this? Do we not include this? I remember Skyping with Ingvil and being like, or we could, how do we first show that cut of the film to our trans community and then get all of the approval written? Like Ingvil was extremely militant about that, because we did not want to upset anybody, because we could already feel that the space was upsetting, you know what I mean, before we even arrived. So there was a lot of care, and that's where I really will commend my colleague, because that's the stamina and the compassion and the sensitivity. She drove that the majority of the time towards that, where I'm in the space of my in the life coaching space. For me, it's just a boundary, so if this feels like it's going to be re-traumatizing, we don't do it, as opposed to Ingvil having that constant compassion and communication and checking in, making sure including. From a producing point, that is a completely new curriculum for the film space. So in the filmmaking space, that's unheard of. You don't do that. It's not people say it's not worth it, it's not going to yield anything, we don't have the inside, we don't, it's difficult, we spent the whole day filming, we can't use it, budgets, people get very technical. Whereas Ingvil was like, no, we're going to do this painstakingly, one step at a time. So even that debate and conflict between us, are we doing this with the trans group? Are we not doing this? Should we go again? Should we try again? Do we find money somewhere out of someone's pocket to try again? That kind of commitment to that inclusivity was deep. And if I look back now, it was a massive challenge for us. It was massive because we ourselves were also walking on eggshells, most of the time, making sure we're not breaking anything, or moving around pieces that were already laying on the floor. But in the end, if I look back now, wow, the reward from inclusivity, the reward of intersectionality, the reward of having voices in the space where there was no voices before, that is next level. That is changing the way that we see society, the way that we can move as a global nation. It's worth it in the end. But talking about the process, it was extremely difficult. Ingvil can also share her sentiments about that.
Yeah. I just also want to say with the Vandela, we had a very special arrangement with them, because we didn't have a release note. We had agreed that if Vandela didn't like the final cut, or if they want to withdraw from the project, even at the final cut, it would happen. So that was nerve-wracking, because we knew that we could have been spending a lot of of time and work and bringing in a lot of people, and that maybe in the end Vandila would be, no, this is actually not a true representation of us and the trans collective. So and then we wouldn't have a film. And I think one of my best moments was after Vandila had seen the film, and she wrote back and said, this is the best representation I've actually seen of the movement. And we also had consent from everyone in the trans collective who is, and they were the ones who provided us with the material, the footage from the trans capture protest. So because we felt if we failed them, the project was just a failed project. So then we wouldn't even want to show it to anyone, you know. Then it would just be closed down. So so that was extremely important.
I'm just going to jump in here and let the audience members, if others have questions, please raise your hand or put something in the chat and we'll raise it. And maybe I'll just kind of pick up on that last comments there, and wondering what has been the reception of the film, not only by the participants, which is found quite successful, but in the various screenings you've had, albeit virtual. Because you started, Ingvild, by saying you're keen to make sure the debate and the struggles that were going on in South Africa are also Norwegians, in your case, are hearing about them. And you mentioned one of the activists talked to Sami activists in Norway, but what have been the reception of not only in South Africa, which is extremely important, but elsewhere?
So I think it's been very interesting how that there's been a big variation. I think in many of the biggest cities, these issues were already there. So we were discussing, we could have more debates, I think like we also have here on, differences and similarities, etc. I think it was when we premiered in Norway, people were like, I never really, never heard about this. I never thought about this. And then half a year later, Black Lives Matter happened in the US and globally. And suddenly people were like, and then also the discussions opened. So after that, people could much more see the different nuances and engage with the debates in a more complex manner. And that's what I feel has been the difference in different places we've shown it. It's like, are they almost like the first meeting with these issues? And or like more of a closer similarity also with other activists who want to learn, but based on a common grounding. So it's been very different, but I think it's also after Black Lives Matter, things really changed, I think, in the world of how people understood these issues, and which while before that, I think it was only a few places, like in the US, bigger cities, or like more who had more gone through these post-colonial discussions for a long time, who really got it, while others didn't, And I think in many countries, it's also opened up a lot for maybe like even if you haven't had colonialism, you know, you have other issues and that have been interesting to tap into, you know, of issues of racism, prejudice, gender, sexuality in different forms, you know, and learning from those very different but similar experiences.
Yeah, I think for me, with our different film festivals and things, again, what Ingrid was saying, the level of engagement around issues would be the first thing. How deep can we go? Because it's, you know, we can really go, you know, all the way down to your ancestry, you know, we can go all the way down. But then also, it's kind of also this chat around film itself. So this process actually spoiled me in many ways, because now whenever I'm co-producing with white counterparts, I'm like, hey, I never had this problem with Ingrid. Now I'm having this problem now. What's happening? So I've got like this, I'm like spoiled now forever, because yeah, it's just never like, this has been an education in filmmaking for me as well. This process and the content, because again, like Ingrid said earlier on, the intersectionality, the given intersectionality of the film is a framework for how you go about projects, right? So now when I'm working with any kind of project, I'm looking at it from that lens, constantly saying, okay, cool, so that's a great idea, but let's look at where you're coming from. Let's look at the privilege. Let's look at, you know, gender expression. Let's look at, so that we're making sure, again, we don't have another one Dealey situation where we all, you know, we don't want our film to be shameful to anyone, or we don't want our project to be the embarrassment for someone's culture, or to be the trigger point for someone individually who can't walk away from this and say that they're proud to be part of this, you know. So that framework for projects, for any kind of creative project, or a project where different people, different talents come together for one goal, you know, that framework. So when we were talking to, I think it was people, I think it was the what was the North American, hot dogs, those hot dogs, right? So I think with the hot dogs experience, we could tell when it was purely about film and, you know, the way forward with filmmaking, and how did this co-production benefit, and the economic benefits, and the and then it's like, who's actually interested in changing systematically the framework of filmmaking, which is also very much colonial, right? So yeah, who holds the power? Yeah, but okay, no, they say to us, we want to talk to your director. And it's like, okay, but the director might not have, you know, wasn't involved with these issues, which we find a lot more important, you know, than the size of the frame, you know? So it's like, who we talking to and what's the value extraction from that conversation really depended on where we were and what their motive was in terms of learning from this experience. So we've been lucky that the majority has been quite deep and internal. But we find that that was the case when there were academics around us, when there were activists around us, as opposed to just pure, you know, filmmaking process. I think the filmmaking side, we still need to transform that, where people are looking at frameworks. How do we expand frameworks? Like Ingrid was saying, how do we look at who's funding our films? Are they educated on these issues? Our funders, you know, where's our money coming from? Do they understand what we need on the ground and the issues we're facing on the ground at the moment as millennials, where we're trying to create a middle ground with each other, culturally, race-wise, language-wise. So yeah, it's been diverse, the experience.
Really rich. Many thanks. I'll turn to Vivian, then Wendy, then Emily.
Thank you, and first of all, thank you so much for making this film. I can say, I enjoy, and to the organizers of this event for circulating it. I really learned and enjoyed seeing it, and I can say, as a professor that teaches a lot of courses in political anthropology and on social movements, that this is a wonderful resource for me in my classes, and I'm sure that, you know, many of students in different universities worldwide really will relate to it and find it very inspiring. So thank you for the effort, and also again, the organizers, the opportunity to learn so many details about the process, and it's thank you for this conversation. My questions have perhaps more to do with the movement and less to do with the film, although to some extent, and they in a sense return to the really important conversations we were having earlier, right, as to what extent this movement was able to connect outside of the walls of what in the end tends to be, universities tend to be to some extent elitist structurally. How much could it connect to the outside? How much did it connect to other generations, so on? And then I was wondering very much, also while I was watching the film, but especially listening to this, the role of the media, right? I mean, it felt, and the social media here and the possible tensions, generational tensions of conversations in social media that don't reach other generations or certain social classes or so on and so forth. And so I really have genuine questions about, so first of all, correct me if I'm wrong, but it really felt like the terrain, the actual sites of struggle were the campus, was the campus primarily, and the media, right? Especially social media. There was not so much, I have questions as to how the media reported and covered the movement, and to what extent your analysis of to what extent the responsibility of how perhaps little it reached the masses, let's say, or popular, right, or people outside of universities, to what extent is the media responsible perhaps for framing protests in ways, I mean, because that is so often the case, right, with these, so do you have an analysis of that? To what extent was it, somehow the perils of social media that are not necessarily, right? So I think there's a tension that social media activists can control the message a lot more, and yet social media tends to be quite tribal, as we say, right, in terms of the audiences that it reaches. And then the tension of, okay, then it becomes very important to reach out to mainstream media, and yet that's also a perilous terrain. So any analysis, thoughts, or experience of that, and I would love to hear about. Thank you.
So maybe I can just talk about it locally, and then Ingvild can speak about how she saw that internationally, because obviously she's watching from, that's how she found the story on the media. So that would be interesting to unpack from an international lens. I think from a local lens, we were look, the protests took place on the campus, definitely, but there was a lot of protests in actual town, in Cape Town itself, towards the parliament building, so getting hold of, government, approaching government directly. It was very difficult. Like I said, there's this rhetoric that there's an entitlement, that the youth are entitled, right? That they want free things, they want handouts, they want the framework, or let me say the ideas that were being kind of framed around the students was that they these loud hooligans destroying things and entitled, and they want handouts, and this is not the way type forward. But also remember that education in South Africa is a money-making, it's a money-making business, right? So these are capitalist institutions, and any kind of ideas around that was basically stumped down. The students themselves, a lot of the most brilliant students at these universities, they come from very humble homes. So the juxtaposition from going from campus to home every day is what, the infrastructure of apartheid is very much present on that journey. So every day you're going through, viscerally you're having that experience. And so the trigger points were phenomenal around the actual statue itself. Never in the history of our country have we ever been, as a generation, that triggered by art. Right. So this statue is a form of art. Someone created this with a lot of talent. They put it up there, right? And here you've got this entire generation that every time they walk past the statue, it's a slap in the face, literally, because they've just arrived from an area of our city where those individuals were the murderers, right? I mean, that's what it was, a genocide, right? So apartheid, colonization, and then apartheid. So just layers of genocide in South Africa. So it's like, I love it. So one of the students put it like, would you put, Hitler in the center of university in Germany. No, you wouldn't. So what's Cecil doing here? Like, it's weird, you know, like, can we have that conversation? Unfortunately, as the country, we weren't ready to have that conversation because the government is seen as, you know, corrupt fools who we're just kind of waiting for them to kind of, you know, die off. So the next generation can take control politically of a new way. So the government is eating the money and they, you know, they're doing their thing. And then the country is run by the old colonial powers, the mines, you know, old money, really, really old colonial money. So the students were up against enormous guns. I mean, it was like, I think the dent they made in our consciousness was around, we have a voice, we have the brains, we are able to organize, we are able to group together for a single goal. And those achievements were for the generation itself. Whether that made an impact on the generation above them, I have no idea. I still don't think so, because when I try to have this debate with my own family, it's a losing game, right? So again, I'm always saying to people, talk to the people at home first. Before you want to talk to anybody, first find out what your family says. If your family are not able to connect with you on an issue, it's probably like that in the next home and all the homes in the same road as you, right? So I think for the Fallists themselves, the massive achievement was we can organize, we can challenge the state. We are able to, using social media, able to gain popularity and support. So all of these systems were brought together for this goal. And also we have beautiful, brilliant Black leadership in us. So we are leaders and we are able to voice our concerns and our pains. And also besides that, we are also able to express it through art. So we are multi-talented, willing and in charge of our destiny. And I think that was the most beautiful thing that came out of the movement. The sad thing that came out of the movement was the lack of support for that brilliant, you know, mess that the Fallist movement was. There was that support to saying, okay, the next steps, people to come in and mediate, people to come in and say, okay, so what would an economic plan look like for zero fees for schools, for the university students who are at res, who are living on campus, instead of, you know, finding someone to pay for your fees and, you know, using different methods. There's various different methods that young Black students are using, like sex work, having 5 jobs at night to be able to pay for your fees, just the emotional, you know, emotional blackmail, going back and forth between families. There's a real struggle to get ahead, just on an education level, and a massive gap in our society because of apartheid, because of colonialism, that, you know, the state and society could have stepped in and said, let's look at this model. Let's make sure that our children are supported. Let's make sure that, okay, fees are not going to be free for the next couple of years, but where's that support system? Where are the lift clubs? You know, where's the transport? How are people eating basic needs of our students? That was the failure. That was the failure from our society as a whole. Instead of asking those questions to the young people, it was, you're entitled, you want a handout, you want things for free, this is not how we move forward as a nation. Typical, you know, the typical African mindset, don't want to work hard for what you have. It was that constant bullying and the, you know, tiring down of that psyche as the young Black brilliant leader, that I think wore them down in the end. And now if I look back now, I say the triumph or the achievement, the art, the knowing that we can organize, that we have leaders in and amongst us, we are able to challenge the state, that we are not in a lack of leadership. We're not looking at our older generation of politicians and going, oh my gosh, we're nothing like that generation. We are nothing like the current corrupt generations of politicians running our country. And there will be a change, but there's this time period now where we're kind of waiting to be big, waiting to be old enough, waiting to take over, and, you know, allowing the current ones to sort of kind of taper off. So I think it's this lull period where we're reaching out to our global families, we're reaching out beyond our country to form that consciousness and that alliance, because that is the most beautiful thing about social media. Okay, it has its flaws, definitely, but the most beautiful thing about social media and media in general is that we're able to have a sister in Norway that I never see, but that I talk to about the deepest parts of my soul and create art for, you know, the rest of the world with. That is the beauty of this time and place that we are in now. So that's definitely on a, I think on a local level, Ingvo.
Yeah, so I don't know too much, you know, about also kind of how the movement was portrayed by the media and like the role of the different types of medias, except from what I've been told by the activists themselves, and also by seeing reading media, where they were talking a lot about, you know, the villainization, you know, like as I was saying, the portrayal of hooliganism, violence, etc., not really taking into consideration that very often these were students who were meeting private security firms who have that have roots straight back, you know, to the apartheid era. So there's a lot of issues that could have been covered in the film that were not covered in the film, but kind of the violent nature of the security apparatus and the military in facing the students, and then the media's portrayal of the students as being the violent force was like very problematic, and probably also, I would think, contributed to this perspective in people's minds, you know, that of the students being too violent, not really critically reflecting on who they were up against. And I think looking also, for instance, also from an outside perspective. So when we first discovered, for instance, what we thought, you know, were also the very cool arts, you know, issues that would typically be in again, like this kind of more like urban based indie, you know, web pages or media that were definitely not reaching out to the masses, you know, and also when it comes to social media, that I really don't know to the extent to which these different social media groups of the movements, how much they worked and how much they reach out to the bigger masses of youth, you know, across the country. That I don't know, but so then I would just say that, you know, often we have these, like, social media can create these like silos as well as broad outreach, but social media was like, the movement was huge at some point. It was like, it's really spread across the country to all the campuses, all the urban and even also more rural areas. And so it was definitely a mass movement at some for quite a while. But it's beyond me to know, you know, how it went even further, because I wouldn't know that. So then we would have to talk, I think, to the activists themselves. Yeah.
Wonderful. Many thanks. I'm going to turn to Wendy, and then we'll turn to Emily, and then our last question will come from Janie afterwards. Wendy.
Okay, just a quick question, because I think you've actually given the answers, but I just want to know what the state of activism is now on the campuses in South Africa. It seems that the Fallism movement, it was a mass movement, but it was limited, 2014 to 2016. Has it been taken up by the next wave of undergraduates? Has it continued to spread to other campuses? I know the pandemic has gotten in the way, but what is the state now? Has it pretty well disbanded? I know at the end of the film, there's a lot of talk about fatigue and trauma, and there's only so much you can do to keep up that level of activism. So if you could just tell me about the current state of activism, that would be great.
Well, definitely the pandemic threw a spanner in the works there. So the campus is all closed and people had to go online. A lot of people got disqualified from university or excluded from university with regard because of fees. I mean, look, this whole thing was fees, right? So majority, were excluded. But it was very difficult to keep up that activism. I think that like I mentioned earlier, the triumph for what we won at the end of the day was a different way of being with one another. And also the idea and the hope that this is not, we're not taking this idea off the table, we're parking it for a time where our systems can handle the intensity of the change we're asking for. Right. So at the moment, the system can't, there's no capacity in the system or the leadership in the system. The head of the university or the chancellor, Max Price, he left now. There's a woman of color in charge, Black woman in charge. All these systems had to kind of be reshuffled. A lot of the professors had to be reshuffled. A lot of professors left. New professors have come. And this is countrywide. But obviously the focus being on UCT campus where we focus, but this is what's been happening post Fees Must Fall, was a look at the faculty, was a look at leadership within the faculty, the physical space of the campus. So it did definitely have a massive impact on change. Where the actual fall lists are right now in terms of are they banded together still apart, I don't have that information right now, but I still do work with the universities on different issues. So I'm still in contact with universities in South Africa, and what I can see, because I work online with them majority of the time, is that a lot of people have left. There's a lot of new faces in terms of faculty in different departments. And I think that definitely came from, you think you know someone. It's like this thing now, like, you think you know someone, they're on your Facebook, they're friends with you on Facebook, and then they post a meme or something and you're like, I don't know if we're friends anymore. I don't know. You unfriend them because you're like, how are you talking? How are you thinking? Like, what's happening? Fees Must Fall did that. It brought to light the deep value systems of our faculty members. And you could have had that professor, you could have loved the socks of that professor, but then you saw how that professor reacted to the movement and you were like, well, no more, So Fees Must Fall had that social aspect where you made friends and made enemies because of what happened. So we're dealing with the reshuffling of who's a friend and who's a foe right now, I think, on campuses. And as for now, like I said, we're waiting, we're building, we're educating ourselves, finding different lenses to connect. And hopefully, that will inspire the recovery of a lot of the leaders who had to deal with post-protest traumas that came up. And I'm hopeful that the recovery time after, recovery time, they will be able to take up places in society and become leaders in society, outside of campus, because that's where we desperately need them right now. So that's my hope for that, Wendy.
Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Emily.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it very, very short. I want to come back to something you said, we saw that really, made me think throughout this this event. You said university is a space, is an intellectual space of thinking and talking, right? And that echoes the words of, I think, Miki within the documentary, where they said, we are encouraged to speak out about these issues, but not take action. And this is very important, I find, to this specific discussion we're having, because the campus, even in the film, was depicted as this very strategic location, strategic place where movement building occurs, right? And as a student and as students in general, we are encouraged by our professors. I have many professors here that I know have encouraged us to challenge the institutions to rethink. Like thinking critically is something that always come back to the fore when discussing anything in class. So I'm wondering, how do we even in this discussion of decolonizing academia, it's a very abstract term, and it's very abstract, but I think even like these movements, the Must Fall movements, really show us in very concrete ways how to decolonize academia, how to transform places of thinking and talking, of discussion, into places of taking action. And towards the end, just to kind of link it to what I think Wendy was saying, the fatigue that happens at the end of this, of these movements, and these moments after, we're all asking, okay, so what's next? What do we do next? I think, and please feel free to comment on this. This is where I find universities need to step in. And if we're very serious about this decolonization project, and if we're genuine about it, then universities should provide the resources, should provide the means to create these spaces and these movements, whether it's on campus or outside campus. So I think it is our responsibility as students, as professors here, to really do that. Sorry, to really do that and play that role. So I was just, I don't think there's a question that I formulated, but I guess if I were to ask one, how do you think we do that? And especially since you've been and you've seen these people, you've been through like, you've seen the way these movements like get built. How would you do this? How would you go about asking what happens next after everything dies down?
So I was invited to a dinner with the SRC of the campus at some point, and then a dinner with the professors of color, right? And there was, they were literally talking about, Emily, like what you talking about. So like the steps and the support and what do we do and all that. And for me, the richness that came out of those questions, look, if you're gonna criticize someone's house, right, and say, oh, I wish you had made the tiles in the bathroom gray, red is so alarming, now I'm sitting there trying to relax and now I've got red tiles all over, someone put those tiles in the bathroom because it was the meaning for them, there was something in it for them, they built something, there was a philosophy around red tiles at the time, things really came from a point of, okay, I'm now going to create something with my wealth, with what I have. The whole discussion is around how much can you reform versus how much can you create. So with the Black professors at the time, it was like, we should open our own university. Do we pump this energy and all of this into reforming UCT? Or do we open up a university because we have enough people around the table here to do our own thing, right? But it's again, it comes from that. It comes from having that, we call it pluck. I don't know what the English word for pluck is. Pluck is like strength. It comes from that, I will do this despite. Courage, right? Thank you. My partner's here in the background giving me English. So pluck is courage, right? So do you have the courage to actually take up that territory with those thoughts and ideas that you have? Do you have the courage to actually lay down that cement foundation? Someone's got to buy the cement. Someone's got to come and put it in there. Start that outdoor classroom. Start that online thing. Do you actually have what it takes to create something outside of those thoughts and feelings that you have? Because when you're challenging an institution, it's someone's grandfather, it's someone's something that put down those roots. When you're trying to uproot something, you have to understand what went into putting those roots down. And if you don't have access into that consciousness and you don't have access into changing the idea of legacy around that rooted system, sometimes it's better to abandon that plight and to put your energy into creating and incubating and birthing something new. And those things, as time goes on and you get the buy-in of your generations, people will naturally glide towards what resonates for the time. And those spaces could become museums and relics and other things. But to try and pick a fight when your energy and your creativity and everything that is brilliant within you could be used for birthing process is, it's that switch in your energy that we need to now, release into the collective consciousness as Generation Z, as millennials, because the fight will take from you and it will exhaust you and could re-traumatize you in so many ways. Whereas if you create the map of thinking in your incubation space currently at your current university, if you're there to learn from people who have gone through things and get as much value from the space as possible, so that you are able to go down in history and create something else, where, versus trying to change the color of the tiles in the bathroom. You know what I mean? Like, it comes down to basic domestic issues like that at the end of the day. Tearing down that statue was probably the best thing we ever did, but it left a trail of trauma also in that space, right? The simple ask of putting that statue into a museum. Why must it be in our campus? Why can't it be in a museum? We're not saying we're going to remove history. We're saying, can history be in a place where we can handle it versus having to look at it every day? Just that simple conversation. It was an ask. It was a simple ask. Didn't happen. What's next? Violence is the next natural answer, right? That constant cycle of asking no violence, you have to have all your ducks in a row to be able to take on that, right? And you also need to have that recovery plan for yourself as an individual. So I would always recommend to people, have the conversation, have the ask. Before you meet any kind of before you go into anything reactionary, ask yourself if it's in your timeline around, when I leave this place, what's my next action point? Is my dream one day to be in a space that is different? Can I action that dream? Do I have enough support to do that? Because destroying what is there and having that fight, there are consequences to that. And if we're not ready for those consequences, both internally and externally, sometimes, like with the Fees Must Fall movement, the flame can be stopped before it actually becomes a fire. So I think for us, the next question is, are we able to create legacy? What does brilliant Black legacy look like at this time? Where do we start? Are we creating curriculum? Are we writing books? What are we leaving behind so that we don't have to have that fight? Because before, definitely in South Africa, we didn't have enough Black professors before to start a new university, right? We didn't have enough brilliant Black students at university who could become professors. So because of apartheid, we were way behind, the rest of the continent. I know in Senegal, in other places in the continent, this is not the reality. But for us as South Africans, this was the reality. So for us, it was a generation game. Now we have those things. Can we build our own UCT, or are we going to try and change, the infrastructure when we know that UCT is run by Britain? You know what I mean? Like, we're not even in Britain. How are we going to do that? So removing the statue is one thing, but changing the ethos of a place is something completely different. So very long-winded answer, my apologies. But I hope that you understand what I'm trying to say. It's a question of legacy. And it's time now for us to create that legacy. Whether we're starting it now, we're not going to be there to celebrate it. It's beyond our lifetime, but that is what legacy is. And I think then there's no short answer. We just need to commit at the end of the day.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Janie?
Yeah, I feel like I've just been really just listening, and there's so many things that have come up, and I know we're short for time now. And I think my question really is for the both of you, and what is like next for the two of you, or do you have like plans to work together in the future, or like individually have projects related to this topic, or yeah, that's basically the question.
Ingo?
So we started on having an idea for a new project. To be completely like honest, it's not ideal to be a documentary producer during a pandemic. So it's really taken a toll on, like, you know, you can't funding, travel, planning, shooting, you know. Yeah, so I think some things have paused a bit more than it would have otherwise. But now it's like also coming, it looks like it's coming to the end. I think the first year for me and Visal was just like, it's soon over, like just like keep on running. And then at some point we just kind of hit the wall, you know, of and then kind of just like kind of resting and picking up the pieces and like, okay, I need to, yeah, what am I gonna live on while this is happening, you know? It's so that's that's a bit of my very honest answer of where things are. There are some projects and ideas, but it's also been yeah, it's been more difficult than than we first believed the first year.
Well, I think that our sort of legacy, our friendship is in the name of the film, right? So the art of Fallism. So we had like this whole, we didn't name the film. There was a name for the film, but it wasn't in there. And there was a name. And then naming a film is like naming a child, you know? So it's like really, like it's an intense thing. You have to like talk about it. And these are the parents, now what do we want to call this thing? And when we decided on the art of Fallism, it was because the film process and everything that happened had really informed us and changed us, and was almost like a curriculum in itself. So like the art of war, you know, it's these comments from these generals and all their insights into how to do this thing. And the art of Fallism, this film was that for us. We were educated by giants, you know, the Transcapture, the Mickeys of the world, the Sitembile and Zanis of the world. We were educated. We felt like we had gone through that book, you know. Now we could now go into any university space or any place of art, and we felt equipped now. We felt equipped to have a language, to have intentions, to navigate conflict, to understand our privilege, to understand who's not in the room or who's not on the screen, who's not represented, who is represented. And I think, yeah, that friendship and that our future earnings, you know, is all cemented in that title, that we want to create for the world, and we also want to create change with our films. So whenever there will be an opportunity to do those things where there's education, creativity, and change, you'll find myself and Ingwil there. We've put that out there. We're manifesting that. We're waiting for everyone to have herd immunity so we can get to the places we need to be. We're vaccinated now. We've got our boosters. So we're doing everything on our side to find our middle ground again. So literally myself and Ingwil like here on the globe. So we have to like find literally the middle all the time. So yeah, hopefully you guys send your praise to us. We'll make our next film. We'll be the first to know.
Thank you.
Wow, so this is wonderful, over 2 hours of a discussion. I want to warmly thank Abu Bakr, Felicity, Janie, Jean, Emily, and especially to translate one of the ways you say thank you in Shishona, Maitabasa. You have done work, Vissel and Ingvil. Now, not only have you produced this stunning documentary, but in really thinking through these issues. And it sounds like in the process, but even in for us to use your word, we so to equip us better in thinking through a range of struggles and interventions and questions we should be asking. And my colleague Christine Duff, who's the director of the Institute of African Studies, sent her apologies. She had to leave a few minutes ago to prepare to teach, but she said it's incredibly, you learned a ton from your film and this incredibly rich and frank discussion as we all have. We'll put the recording up on our website. We'll let everyone know. And again, I encourage people, if you haven't watched this amazing film, please do. And it's going to be up on the link for a couple more weeks. And I also look forward to the time to having you here in person for your next film project, as well as others involved with it. It was just a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Mwah.
Yes.
Blessings to everyone. Stay safe. Wash your hands. See you soon.
Okay.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Everything about the discussion felt right, it felt nice, and it made sense. I absolutely loved it.
Thank you, Jan. And congrats for your for graduating. Congratulations. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Take care. Have a good evening, you two.
You too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.